Welcome back for this plenary debate, and after our discussion, you as well will have the opportunity to ask some questions, so keep it in mind. Questions are very welcome in about half an hour, but first, I kindly invite them back on stage, our three keynote speakers, Torsten Ludwig, Celia Martinez-Yanez, and Stijn Reinders. Pick up a chair and pick up a handheld microphone, Celia, so that we will hear you, quite important today. And we'll have a look right away at the answers of the Mentimeter questions we asked. Stijn, we asked, digital media can never replace the physical experience at a heritage place. And as you can see, a vast majority agreed. Does that surprise you? Stijn.
Oh, yeah, thanks. The question is, well, it doesn't really surprise me because we do know that authenticity is still really important for visitors. And most people consider a digital representation as the copy of an original. So in that sense, a reproduction can never really acquire the same essence and joy and magic that a real heritage object can have. I do agree with that. So I do understand that most people would vote for yes here. But I would like to extend the question a little bit and also state, well, it can never replace, true, but at the same time, it can enhance the physical experience. So going over to a place, having, for example, digital media to strengthen your experience, and also, for example, the power of narratives that I discussed this morning, that is really important to have a great high-value experience. So I would say digital media is ideal to enhance the physical experience of a heritage site.
But it can't replace it. You said yes as well. I heard you saying it, Celia. So you talked in your presentation as well about limiting sites if necessary. So you can't replace it, but still you have to look when sites are too popular?
Well, both things are connected, actually, I think. On the one hand, regarding the question of digital media, if I may, I challenged you to think about if this question would never be made if we're dealing with natural sites. You will never ask so, because in a natural site you have to experience. Mm-hmm. You don't think on the mountains in a digital framework. It's the same for cultural heritage, I think. When you are in a place, you are moved by the place. I'm not very moved when I see a place in my computer. I'm learning or I'm researching at the time, but for enjoying a place, you have to be there.
Well, it's more than just a computer. Virtual reality, in 10, 20 years, what can we do with digital media?
I know, but I'm very worried of a trend that we have right now, because as he said, digital media are great to enhance the on-site experience. But I'm very, very worried if we are not thinking that visitors cannot understand the decay of heritage sites sometimes. And heritage, well, it deteriorates with time, and it's normal that it's not complete and brilliant and perfectly finished. And we have to care with that, because time is going through the places, and we need to experience time in heritage. So I think also that digital media have to take care about that.
Okay, interesting. Torsten, would you answer like the majority?
I think we're all on the same page, but a physical experience, just to explain this a little bit, we are usually thinking of our five senses, but we have more senses. So they have a sense of balance, a sense of temperature, a sense of space, of muscle tension. So all that are things that feed into a whole interpretive experience. And if we use digital media to replace such an experience, I'm absolutely with the yes group. We will not be able to do this because it's not. A lot of things are bracketed from the experience if we are focused on the digital media. But I agree, of course, that digital media could enhance and support it, and this is our responsibility to look carefully what media does support the experience and what media does replace the experience in a way that it is no longer an experience people will remember. Mm-hmm. So it might be catchy, it might be funny, interesting, like everything in the entertainment world, but it's nothing that we keep in our hearts when we're leaving, and this is what we should go for. So the filter should be, how can we find digital media who support this experience in this way, and avoid the ones they want to sell us, which basically replace it and do not help the people to get in this close connection.
Okay. Stijn, we saw a picture of Hogwarts in your presentation, but for instance, Lascaux Cave, they rebuilt the cave. It's not the real thing, but it is still a physical experience. So if we move on to that, that's something different than a digital replacement. Can that replace it? Can that replace the cultural heritage side?
I think the whole, let's say, myth of authenticity and the idea that there's an original and a copy that is so part of our whole Western mindset that it will always be really difficult to provide the same and attach the same kind of value to a copy cave. So I would still stick to the answer that was just given by the majority. Okay. But I do want to say that also about digital media. I mean, you can also talk about this as virtual reality versus augmented reality. And virtual reality has been a dream that has been with us for many decades, if not centuries, but it just does never really seem to work. It's never becoming that really popular. Also not the peculiar VR that's nowadays being promoted. It doesn't really become a commercial success, but actually augmented reality, in which there is this combination of a real on-site experience and a real direct sensory experience, combined with information and additional layers that you get from digital sources and digital data, that actually does seem to work quite well, because it combines the two powers of the original experience and getting access to all that rich data that we have online usually.
Okay, we move to the next Mentimeter question. Celia, should objects be presented in their original context, yes or no? What would you say?
I know the audience has said the contrary. I think that objects have always that this is possible, should be presented in their original context. I think heritage is attached to a place, and when you miss the context, you missed a lot of the values which join the place, the monument, or whatever kind of heritage we're talking to, and the communities and the people. And then, well, there are certain objects or heritage things that you cannot preserve in its own place for more time because of there are catastrophes or something. But otherwise, there are always some ways to try to preserve the site and still stick to the place. This conference is about destination, it's about the places, and the places are linked to the people as well. And if we separate that, we are missing values. And indeed, now we look for, and I know you are looking also for this in this conference, to link the intangible and the tangible aspects. And this is only when you are attached to a place. Otherwise, it's lost. So the sense of place, I think, is very important.
Okay. Torsten, do you agree with the majority or with Celia?
No, I must say I agree more with Celia. It has also another aspect if we're talking about involving local people or valuing local places. In the past, we had often, especially against the national background, the idea was to create one house where everything is in which valuable for the nation. And that meant that often objects were taken together from places, and there were replicas in the places then, so it was no longer so valuable. Of course, it has an impact on tourism also, because people want to see the real thing. And if all the real things are in one big house, they go to the big house and it's done. But if the real things are at little local communities, they have their treasure, and for them, of course, it's a lot. Then we have another structure of tourism, and we could think about, is it possible then to distribute and to put these honeypots a little bit apart and distribute also the income of tourism a little bit more to the countryside. Of course, if they are able and if there is enough funding to ensure that things are kept.
Well, that would be my next question. It sounds logical, and if it's possible in an ideal world, yes, but it isn't always possible, is it? And Celia, how would you cope with that then?
I would doubt whether the main reason why it is done like this still is that it's not possible. I think, like with the digital media, we should seriously look for opportunities, and if we realize it is not possible, yes, then it is not possible. But I know from Germany, spontaneously 5 cases where you could say it would have been possible to arrange it. In some places they do it actually, but we have this astronomic map. I don't know whether you heard about it. Bronze Age is a very, very famous thing. They built a whole museum where they could keep it, and in the end they moved it nevertheless to the town of the Bundesland. So it would have been possible, but it's more an ideological thing, I think.
Celia, can you?
Yeah, I mean, because it's very easy to say we cannot preserve that in that place. We put a replica and we take the object to a museum or an interpreter center, but I think that's the easy way. It's not the logical one. And let's think, I mean, many heritage sites, even fine arts properties, they have been there for centuries. They have been there for centuries. They will continue being there if we take advantage of preventive conservation, especially. So it is not, I don't think it is fair that we transfer the things from one place to the other. Also, the future generations have a right to see the things as they are, and I will always try to stick to that. For example, we had an example in Madrid, in Spain. We have the Debod temple. You know, this history of the build of the Aswan press, that many temples were given as a present by Egypt to the countries that helped in that campaign. And we have the Debod temple in Madrid, and there have been a controversy if the place should be preserved on site or should come back or whatever. So there were a very big research about which are the causes of decay. And it was only the visitation of the site. It was not because it was in open air, it was not traffic, it was only the visit. So we have to take care with those things and take wise decisions, I guess.
Okay, I don't know if the Metropolitan Museum in New York would like to hear you say those things, but that's another question. You talked about authenticity, Stan. Is authenticity only to be found in the original context? Maybe that's an interesting extra question.
I think the question that you just posed is quite complex, and we didn't touch upon restitution debates yet explicitly. But if you think about the colonial context and about objects that were simply looted or taken from former colonies back then I think it's also there's a moral. It's just to return and return those kind of cultural objects. Yeah. So I would, in a lot of instances, I would say yes, it should return and present it in the original context. But of course, sometimes the original context is no longer there anymore. So can you then still return it, and to whom should it return? So it's very complex, and I think also the example that you mentioned, in some examples, it's actually a gift. So why should it then be returned? Because returning a gift is actually quite insulting, right? So it is complex.
This is a narrow,
and I know, but I do
going.
also know that the Flemish government is quite proactive now in this restitution debate compared to the Netherlands, for example. So I think that's a very interesting and ongoing discussion. Talking about authenticity, also a very complex concept. We have a different. There are different elements to authenticity. You could say this glass is authentic because it's the real glass. So that's some kind of, let's say, empirical authenticity. But in some instances, you would also say something is only authentic if it's placed in the right context. So that is a form of contextual authenticity. And if you displace an object, then it loses that part of its authenticity. So there is a danger there. But I think it's maybe to add an additional layer. So if an object is taken from its original context, it's displaced. But if that history of displacement takes on years or decennia or even centuries, then that history of displacement actually becomes part of the whole cultural biography of the object. So that becomes part of it, and then it's a displaced object. And then returning the object would actually mean forgetting all about that whole dark history of the object itself. So I think there are a lot of different dimensions here.
So even now, when we would have the opportunity to bring things back to the original heritage site, you wouldn't necessarily say we should do
complex. I would not go for yes or no, if it's possible. Let's say maybe.
Yeah, that was no possibility, luckily for us. The final question with the Mentimeter, it gave us this word cloud, and you see it over there. You see participation, co-creation, stories, listen, dialogue, co-creation, storytelling. Stan, what is for you an interesting word, interesting method you see in this word cloud?
Well, I recognize co-creation, interview, conversation, listening, dialogue and storytelling. I think those terms are really key. They are also really key in the kind of workshops that we organize, those co-creative workshops. So I fully recognize the terms being mentioned here, actually, yeah. Yeah, okay. I think they're very important, and I think it's also very positive to see that this co-creation dialogue, really trying to bring different people from society together, trying to listen to different voices, have this multi-perspectivity. That it's really great to see that that's so important also for people present here today.
Torsten, there were methods to involve in a meaningful way, to involve people in a meaningful way. What do we mean with it? Isn't it always meaningful?
Well, it depends. If we can make a personal attachment to something, that's what we say is meaningful. So if I feel personally attached to a cathedral I visit, then it's meaningful. If I hear something about the cathedral, and I can tell you in the end when it was founded and how high, how tall the tower is, it's not meaningful in our definition, okay? So to come to the meaningful part has a lot to do with the storytelling, and I would, actually today we like to use story sharing, because you bring together the storytelling and the dialogue, which are both rated rather high here, and you could say we have this one quality in interpretation which says offering paths to deeper meaning, which means we offer something. So a story we give to the people is an offer, and we expect another story back. So we want to get into a dialogue, which means story sharing in the end. But stories are almost always meaningful in a way that we are touched by them. Even if you think of fairy tales you listened to as a child, you were connecting it to your world, so they became meaningful that way. They were not just information about the wolf and the 7 goats. It touched you in a way, yeah, and that's what we mean by that.
Yeah. So when we see the word cloud and we see participation and dialogue and stories, it combines all three important things
together. Yeah.
Celia, inclusion of the local community is also important in the ICOMOS charter you presented earlier. What methods could help?
I agree pretty much with the keywords that the Mentimeter has gave us. I think that many of these are embedded into concepts that we have developed in the charter. One is heritage commons, the other is governance, and the one is capacity building. I think that all what we are seeing, like listening and participation and co-creation, this is governance. This is what I was referring before, that if we consider heritage not only as an economic asset, but as something that pertains to everybody, we need to deal with heritage from the participatory governance perspective. The very important change in the last years is that before we talk about local stakeholder involvement, and now we are beyond that. We're talking about governance, and of course governance, it means implying all social sectors in the governance of those heritage commons. But this is also linked to capacity building, because of course we need society to be involved, but we need an informed society. And we have a lot of interpretation, like on the values on the sites, but I don't think that society is still very aware of heritage issues and heritage technical aspects of management, of presentation. We need to go beyond that. So for me, governance, participation, and capacity building are very connected, and I hope that's the future of heritage too. Let's see.
Okay, let's hope. Torsten, we talked about story sharing, not storytelling, but story sharing. What is another kind of method you would approve, or what is for you good practice when we talk about these methods to involve the local communities?
Well, we said very simply in interpretation decades ago, people enter a place. If they have a closer connection to the place, when they leave the place, we achieved our goal. So that's a very, very simple rule. So our aim is not to fill them up with something. Our aim is that they get a closer connection to the site. And I would say if we're talking about value-based heritage interpretation, if we can trigger thinking about how people lived in another time, for example, and what that means to us today. So not just separate it and look at it from an interested distance, but being involved and thinking about what were these people driven by, what are we driven by today. This should be our goal at the moment when we're considering all these issues we want to tackle.
And are the two methods you've been discussing methods that can be applied everywhere, anytime?
Definitely. What I've shown you before, I mean, this is what we're teaching in our courses, what I've shown you before with the universal concepts. This is a general thing. You can apply it all around the world, and you can apply it with intangible, tangible, movable, immovable heritage everywhere in every context. So most of what we teach in heritage interpretation, you can apply to basically all heritage sites. Of course, to some it's more relevant than to others. If we're talking about sense of place and we are in a museum environment, it's a different situation. But nevertheless, the methods, the skills basically for a planner, for a curator are similar.
All right, thank you. Stan, if it is difficult to involve people, maybe it's because they're not represented. If you look at heritage tourism, which parts of society are currently not visible or not visible enough? Where should we look at?
Yeah, I think that's also actually a question for the audience, to look at their own location. Some of you are probably affiliated with a certain city or region, or maybe part of society. So I definitely also forward that question to you and think about this. So what parts of my society or my culture or community is actually not represented in the way how we build museum exhibitions, for example. But if you would answer me, and if I would look at the Dutch context, for example, then there is clearly one development taking place now in which the whole the colonial history of museums, in particular dating back to the second half of the 19th century, that is really key to how museums try to rejuvenate their exhibitions, also think about new ways about their collections, also partly on the influence of the Black Lives Matter movement. So that's definitely one of the most important challenges, I think, looking at those parts of our own history that are also prevalent here. And we are now sitting, for example, I would say, in the X of Imperial Belgium. We have here the big station from the 19th century, which is all about opening up Belgium to the modern world, technology and creating this whole national network. We are in a zoo, very great zoo. I think it's the 5th eldest zoo in the world. At the same time, zoos were also part of this large imperial project, which is all about representing the world from a Western perspective, neatly putting everything in boxes. Like here we have Africa, there we have Oceania. So we're definitely here in, let's say, the navel of the imperial project of Flanders. So this is actually also a great point to reflect on that, I would say. So if you ask me, what are the blind spots? I'm not saying that this is a blind spot, and I would not have been working in the last years, because it's really in the center of a lot of debates. But I think also, for the right reasons.
Okay. Celia, do you see blind spots?
I think that there is a big gap between something that I found really tricky, is that like the heritage theory and concept and our knowledge of heritage is bigger and bigger and bigger. I think that society is very much aware of heritage right now, and we haven't had a more involved society that we do have at this time. But at the same time, I think that we still don't know a lot about what does society, not experts, not tourism people, not cultural heritage people. What does society think about heritage? Why is heritage important for society?
And how do you get the answers?
And how do you get the answers? I'm very interested in that, because it's a big gap and it's very contradictory with heritage concept itself, which is supposed to be for people. I'm very interested, for example, the Faro Convention provides a very good framework to start exploring more on that. And I'm very interested particularly on how different people do engage in heritage sites, which are probably not from their country, not from any other places, but you feel attached. How can we make these people to network together and to put their interest and and their enjoyment together. Those are the things that I see that we could still have a lot of improvement in heritage theory and practice, but we need to deepen on that, and I don't know exactly how, but I think that we'll have to listen. Like the Mentimeter will say.
We'll have to listen, but we don't know how. That is difficult for the people in the room. Torsten, do you see the blind spots? Same question for you.
I think, well, first of all, I have a very good book recommendation for all who don't know it from Nina Simon, The Participatory Museum, because she is really inviting people. She reformed a museum in San Diego, and she is really inviting people to express themselves. Because the question, if we ask the question, who is not there, of course we can list some marginalized groups who will not be there, but they're not there because the stories are not attracting to them. They're not interested in this, so why should they go? So if we want to attract them, again the question, what stories do we offer, and do we ask them for their stories? And actually,
but because it has to be a meaningful story for them.
Yeah, and often we are not interested in the stories. So you know, because we say, no, we have our outstanding universal value. That's not linked to this. So this is a point where to start. And that's also a question, and I must say it's because I was emphasizing this role and maybe bridging the gaps in society. What stories are told and what narratives do we tell at heritage sites? And they are often very directed. So there is a mission behind, there is an idea behind. I remember a museum in southern Germany which was about Romans and the Germanic tribes, and the panels basically said all the time, the Romans, they were great, they were integrating all migrants, whoever came, and the Germanic tribes were making trouble all the time. So there is a certain narrative behind where I would question it at a point. I understand the idea, and it's a good idea to, of course, we want to emphasize the openness of the society. But we need to be careful how we tell such stories and where we invite other opinions. So it is a question, I think, what stories do we offer and what stories do we take? And are we open to take also stories we do not like?
Yeah, and Stan, there are always different stories, different sides to any story actually. How can we make visitors aware of the layered meanings of a heritage site?
Yeah, I think also with regard to listening to people and to also opening up new audiences and to also listening to stories that you might actually a little bit dislike because of its political color, I think it's really important that as a museum, you in the end, you do take a stance and you opt for multi-perspectivity, which means that you will allow all different kind of voices, also, for example, from activist groups, but that you make sure that there's not one political idea or one political movement or cultural movement really dominant. I think that is really a key challenge for museums to try and find also, for example, minorities or groups that are sort of left out of the dominant discourses, and also give them a voice, but never turning that into a new dominant voice. So in sense of listening to people, I think multi-perspectivity should always be key. So telling stories sometimes also that clash and that counter each other, but still bringing this together and trying to find commonalities there, maybe also based on the universal values that you showed us earlier. I think that could be a very great starting point. And then in the end, you will by definition get a very layered exhibition. So it's a bit of a lengthy question, but I try to bring the two questions together there. Yeah.
And I thank you for that. Torsten, I see you agreeing with Stan?
Yes, and I think it requires some competences that are not so widespread in our community so far. So we need to see, if we go for all these high terms like the participation and the co-creation and all that requires skills and knowledge, which is different from what we did so far. This is one reason why people do not want to go for it, because they are afraid they might not be able to cope with it. They even, a curator sometimes doesn't send their employees to such a course because they come back with crazy ideas and the curator cannot handle them. Yeah, that's a reality. So we need to really bridge these gaps also between the hierarchies. We have a lot to do with building competences for all the things we're talking about here. We need to be aware of that. So it's not just that we leave the conference and say, good, let's do it like this now. We have to build the capacities and the competences. And on the other hand, I know especially in Belgium, there is a lot going on in terms of co-creation, participation in these things. So we need to collect that. That's why Interbit Europe is there as a network to connect all these good things that are already happening, to bring them together and to show to other people it works if you're really behind it.
Yeah, but it means work for several years for the people in the room. We've been talking about co-creation, about storytelling, about visiting those heritage sites. Should it always include learning, Celia?
Like heritage visit? I think it's absolutely compulsory, but learning can be achieved from many ways. I always say that tourism should be a tool for enhancing access to heritage sites and learning, but access and learning do not mean necessarily only physical and intellectual access.
It's not the date of when the cathedral was built, as Torsten said.
That's it. You have to learn that, but emotions are very important. If we really want to engage society in preservation, we need society to feel. It's not only to learn. You go to school to learn, as we see in the video, but then you have to move forward. That's interpretation aim. Finally, it's making people feel. And so I think tourism is a very important tool in this regard, but we need to see tourism as that, as providing emotional and intellectual, of course, and physical access to heritage, and understanding that learning is not about data, it's about feeling as well. That's the real learning, I think.
And how do we deal with conflicting heritage expectations, Torsten? You've been talking about it, but it's still very interesting, of course, when people come together, not necessarily sharing the same
when we're thinking about what we do in our courses, we have exercises where we have conflict cards on tables. The people need to get into a conflict, and the guide who is in learning has to settle the conflict in a way that both keep their faces. So, and this is absolutely different from what we were teaching 10 years ago, where it was mainly look at the people, use humor, smile at the faces, and So this is another dimension. Because if we call it open-ended questions that are really triggering conflict. If we ask provocative questions, we need to be able to manage what's coming out of the box. So we need this competence. That's what I said before. We need to really rethink some of those competences we need to have. Yeah.
Okay, rethinking a lot of things, and I've been patient enough, but maybe there are some questions in the room. We've got 2 microphones. If you have a question, wave, and a microphone will drift your way, and if you pose the question, please stand up. You will not really be exposed, but just a little bit. Don't be too Flemish, pose the question. Oh, good morning.
Good morning, Mark Kokke, Erfgoed Zeeland, Zealand Heritage. I just want to make an addition to the term of authenticity. I didn't hear it this morning, but it's in the Asian world, it's more about the function of the place, the sense of the place, the former use of the place. Because when here in Europe, the paradigm is shifting. We replace material, for instance the glass, and we replace that for a different glass or plastic version. We all get a bit tricky about now, that's not authentic anymore. But when you replace authentic materials in the Asian world, yeah, it still has an authentic feel to the place, and also the meaning of the place isn't different than before. And one should read the NARA document, one of the ICOMOS charters, to have more information on that. But that way of sensing authenticity, that I missed this morning, and I would like to add that.
Well, that's a good extra. Do you also have a question for one of our... No, just an extra. Okay, just someone has a question. Sir.
My name is Guylain Dursel from the Belgian Historic House Association. So we represent the private owners of historic houses in this country. What I miss in your stories about sharing and the involvement of local communities, etc., I miss the role of the curators, managers, and owners of all these heritage sites. I think that lots of private owners want to share their stories, want to share their heritage, but I think they miss some recognition from the community. You know, everyone considers heritage as a common good, so as a good of common interest. I would not say common property. So we don't want to share our property, but we want to share our stories, you know, and I think it's important also that the private owners and private managers are recognized, not only for the role they play, but also by getting maybe more financial support. And that can be done by grants or by fiscal measures. I saw a picture shown by Mrs. Martinez-Yanes about the economic value of cultural heritage, trillions. So all that money which goes to the commercial activities, hotels, restaurants, tour operators, traveling companies, etc., etc., they're paying taxes on it. So I think it's the role of the public authorities to have part of that revenue.
But those are two different things. I'm going to ask
the owners and managers to be able to maintain this heritage for the sake of the community.
Okay. Thank you very much. So it's about recognition. I see it as a two-way traffic. It's not one way. It's a two-way traffic. How do you see that, Torsten?
Well, definitely. I mean, I cannot. I know why you say this, but I cannot answer that from my position. But I can look at the learning aspect, and I feel sometimes that owners of historic houses do wonderful interpretation work that's not happening at museums in that way, because they want to express what the story is of the place, and they often they combine it with gastronomic heritage and with these experiences. So it's a huge potential. We have a module on interpretive hosting in the Bit Europe where we try to catch up with this, because people who own a winery or own an old castle, usually they are really enthused in sharing it. And from that, I can only answer on this level, not on the grant level. Sorry, I'm not the wrong address and all that. But from the learning aspect, I feel this is a huge potential we could have to move forward. Yeah.
Thank you, Torsten. You didn't like to share the economic data in the beginning, but they are important as well. How do you see this?
I would like to agree a lot with this statement. I think that the problem with and this is why I don't like to talk about the economic data, is that because most of tourism effects are indirect and induced effects. And finally, the truth is that all that money, it never goes to the owners of the sites, nor to the sites themselves. I think it's very unfair. In the charter, we have dealt with that, and we really stress that all the profit that is taken from heritage, it needs to go back to heritage and to the people that preserve heritage. This is not happening, or maybe it's happening, but what I see, if there is a tremendous lack of transparency on that regard. We never know where, I mean, the taxes that hotels and everything take from tourists, they go where? I have never seen in any place that there are politics stating that. That would be very good. It would be good because, but mainly it will be good because visitors will be very much aware on their role in preservation. But if you don't know where your money is going, you only see that you are taking money. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sam, would you like to add something, or do you have the feeling that...
Well, not directly concerning the finances of these private houses, but I do think that if we talk about co-creation, again, it's about also including the perspective of the owner and including his family history, which is, of course, very key to the whole history of such a manor or another historical building. But I think if you follow this line of multi-perspectivity, you would also be interested, for example, in people that have been working in the kitchen or in the stalls, and also include their voice, because that's what a contemporary visitor would like to hear as well, not just the story of who owned it and the position of his or her within the larger power constructions of, in this case, Belgium, but definitely also those people, let's say the downstairs people. And downstairs people, that of course is a reference to upstairs, downstairs and Downton Abbey, which is a great way of getting your manor in the public interest. Just invite a film production company, and it really happened with Downton Abbey. Suddenly, the manor was almost lost, the family was bankrupt. Then the filming for Downton Abbey started, and within 3 years the family was writing black figures again, and now they can sort of even expand their whole enterprise over there. So maybe that's a concrete suggestion.
It's a good final suggestion. On that note, we will end. Thank you all for these questions. If you've got another question, and if you feel that it's not answered yet, our experts will join us for lunch. Don't hesitate to ask your question, but let them eat as well. For now, thank you so much, Stijn Reiners, Torsten Ludwig, and Celia Martinez-Janjes. Thank you.